Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's lecture. My name is Carla Gonzalez, and I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Shaun O'Connor, who's going to be giving a demonstration of early stage modeling and evaluation using magnetic data, using GOCAD's built-in scripting to generate block models for forward modeling. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them into the Q&A or raise your hand, and we'll get to them right at the end. And just a quick reminder that this is being recorded and it's going to be available in our YouTube channel. And I think that's it for me. So go for it, Shaun. And you're muted. There we go.
Can't quite get used to Zoom. Don't know why. I think I said this last time. I'm a Teams guy. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining today. Let me just move some things around here on my screen. That'll do. So as Carla mentioned, I'm going to show you a couple things that we do at this stage, at an early stage of a project in GOCAD. I'm going to show you a little bit of my workflow in GOCAD Mining Suite at the early stages of the project as we work with geological constraints and the geophysics to try to come up with different hypotheses for the sort of course structure of the area where we have, where we're modeling. And typically at this point, we're working with sparse data. And when I say sparse data, I mean, from our perspective, what is usually the norm outside of a mining environment. We're talking about an area of interest of maybe 10 by 10 kilometers with a handful of drill holes maybe, or a couple clusters scattered around the property. And if we're lucky, a cross-section on the geological map, but generally not, particularly nowadays. So what do we do here, and how do we proceed with a project where we're doing what we call an integrated interpretation? We're working towards probably a geologically constrained magnetic model, or at the very least, a geological model that we're going to go do some targeting or further work on. So let's have a look. I'm going to pop open GOCAD now. And here we are. So this is where we're at in the world. We're looking at the 2D magnetic data and the geological map. I'm just going to turn that off for a second. For one of our clients, Treasury Metals, they've very graciously provided us permission to use the data we're compiling as part of their project for this presentation today. So thanks very much to the team at Treasury. Check them out, LinkedIn and the usual suspects if you have a chance. So what we're looking at right here is some really nice, I think it's 100-meter line spacing magnetic data. We've done a new set of filters for it as part of this project. And I'm showing you right now, we're looking at the first vertical derivative draped over the reduced to pole magnetic data. That's how I like to look at it. I find it easy to interpret and good for establishing sort of the texture, but also the intensity of different anomalies in the mag. And this big black box here is the area of interest for our model. So this is where we're going to need, we're basically going to end up with a lithology box set that looks the same as this in plan view. So we think we know a couple things about this area. I'm parachuting everybody today into the project. I've already done a bunch of work. We're sort of pretending, we're at an earlier stage of this project than we actually are. But we think we know a couple of things about the area. We've done a literature review. We've had a look at all the different geological maps that are available for the area. We've carried out a 2D geological interpretation from the magnetic data primarily, and any other remote sensing data sets we have, to put together essentially a pseudo map or a blocked out series of major domains that we think we're going to want to have in our geological model. And at that point, we think we know what those domains are. So in terms of, let me just check something here. Yeah, so in terms of the major domains, we're looking at this area. This is where the area of interest is. There's two strongly magnetic linear domains here that I noticed right away. There's one to the northwest, and there's one kind of to the southeast. They're kind of symmetrical looking. We're zoomed out quite a ways now. Let me turn my scale on just so you understand. So, you know, this bar here is about 4 kilometers, right? So there we're in that 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer neck of the woods for the area of interest, and zoomed out, you know, we're 20s and 30s, that kind of scale. So we zoom out, we see that magnetic layer, and I say layer now because it does seem to be sort of the same thing symmetrically on both sides of what appears to be a regional fold structure. There are some intrusives too, which pop out, well, more or less right away to me. I mean, they're on the geological map, but you can see them really clearly in the mag data. There's a big one down here, which is the Sandy Beach Lake Pluton. There's a small one here, which is, I don't know if it has a name, I call it Gardner Lake. And then there's the Cross Echo Lake intrusion to the northeast here. And you see those really as just sort of blanking out that fabric, almost like the fabric is wrapping around them in the 2D mag data. They each have their own signature though. It's not to say that they're blanking it out. The Cross Echo Lake is quiet and low. There's a little hint of zonation in there. The Gardner Lake stock is fairly clearly zoned. You have this moderate sort of background glow around the edges and then a low in the center. And then down here in the southeast Sandy Beach Lake, it's a more moderately magnetic intrusion. And it does have a little hint of something like zoning. There's something going on, but the whole picture is being disrupted a little bit by these more magnetic volcano-sedimentary units around the edges of it. We've also got some other stuff going on, so I just wave my mouse at that. This is this real high irregular body over here corresponds to mapped iron formation in a regional dome, or like kind of maybe a little lens-like shape on top of the intrusion. It's along the shores of Sandy Beach Lake. And then we gotta have, in addition to the main linear domains here, there's little hints of stuff going on out to the sides in these otherwise fairly quiet domains, a little bit of layering there. And then within the core of this fold structure, there's this irregular moderate to high pattern that sort of sticks out in the middle and that flanks the Gardner stock. You see that there. So that's really what's going on. Let's have a look at what that looks like in terms of constraints to start with that. These are the domains that we want to start looking at from a perspective of how well they fit, how well a model using those constraints fits the magnetic data. So I'm just going to switch my scene here. So this is what that boils down to. I'll turn the mag back on for reference here for a second. But what I've gone through already, I'm going to spare you watching me do this. I've traced out a couple curves showing the edges of these main bodies. So 2 to the northwest, 2 to the southeast. I've traced some closed curves for the outlines of the intrusions. And this is based on the geology map and also on the mag data. So you're going to notice a little bit of a discrepancy one way or the other as I switch between those data sets. It's because at this point, we're really looking at the core structure and we're trying to reconcile what's on that map with what's in the data. Ultimately, we need the answer to the geophysical data when it comes to a constrained model. But from a geological perspective, we're not going to ignore things that have been mapped on the ground either, right? So we need to balance things a little bit. And this is the Sandy Beach Lake down here. So these are really the constraints at this stage. I mean, I'm not going to bother showing you the drilling for this area, but there isn't much, and it's very shallow relative to the scale of the project. So beyond what we're looking at here, this is really what our model needs to honor at this point. So the question is, well, let's start with what we have here and see what that model looks like and go from there. But ultimately, we still need to answer the question of what we're going to do in the subsurface, right? I know for the intrusions, we're going to project them to depth. We don't need to worry about that right now. It may be more complicated than that in the end, but that's how it's going to start, because broadly speaking, that tends to be what is going on here. So we'll take those outlines and just project them down to depth. So really, what can we do for the subsurface problem then? I mean, of course, we can interpret a little bit of the dip from the 2D mag itself. And I'm pretending I don't have the unconstrained inversion right now, which I do have, because that's a whole different kettle of fish. But for now, what we have in addition to these relatively hard constraints, which are this synthesis of observed 2D magnetic data linked back to the geological mapping. Besides that, we have a little conceptual information about the area. What I can tell you about the area is we know from previous mapping that the layering, the volcano sedimentary layering in the area is predominantly steep. It appears to shallow out irregularly around these two stalks and particularly in between them. Also from that previous work, the lower magnetic rocks in the center of the area are intermediate volcanics, a little bit of felsic here and there. and they are younger than the mafic volcanics that make up these magnetic highs along the edges. Both of those units are overlain question mark, unconformably or perhaps disconformably by sedimentary rocks, which flank this fold structure on either side. And those are relatively non-magnetic. They do include a little bit of iron formation, and we're not going to wade into this down here today, which is a larger body of iron formation in the same rocks, but it's outside of this area of interest. That's a story for another day. The intrusions are pre-tectonic or interpreted to be pre-tectonic. They're pre the tectonics, the northwest southeast directed compression that's produced the trends that we see today. And they are interpreted to act like rigid buttresses during that compression. And that's probably what led a little bit to funny layering in between them in this area, in the center of the area of interest. There's doubly plunging folds around here. As we can kind of see from the 2D mag data, we see these different bodies closing. And what that consists of is predominantly very tight southwest to northeast trending folds, and then more open northwest to southeast trending folds that have a longer wavelength. And so what that produces is this broad dome and basin pattern and scattered canoe-shaped folds when you zoom in on an area. But again, this is all based off of mapping. The exposure is not very good here, and there's been very little drilling. So a lot of this is speculative. But again, these are people who spend a lot of time crawling around out there, and there's something to all of this. So we got to take it into account. And there is some evidence, interestingly, of early thrust faulting in the area. It predates this northwest southeast compression that's led to the overall configuration of the rocks we see today. But I think what we can take away from that, from a modeling perspective, is that the stratigraphy that I just mentioned, that you start with mafics and you go into intermediates, a little bit of felsics, and you get up into sedimentary rocks. That stratigraphy cannot really be relied upon today in a simple way anymore, because due to that thrust faulting, you can have repetition and you can remove different units and all sorts of other things way before we did any of this verticalization and squeeze everything together into relatively steep dipping layers. So what I'm thinking here is we can start with a very simple model. We're going to project these contacts that we're looking at to depth of surfaces, and we're going to run a forward model of that just to see what it looks like. Okay, so this is scenario one. Just let the surfaces dip. So I'm going to switch. I'll show you what that looks like again. Now these are swap out, but they're not a cop out, okay, folks, because I had those lines, curves drawn already. I'm going to save you watching me draw a line here today. But making these surfaces, there's a very straightforward command here under surfaces in GOCAD Mining Suite. We can make a fault network from those surfaces, and basically you're just projecting them along a given dip, and you can switch the direction around. So very, very simple. It's a couple clicks. I'm just not doing it today because I'm nervous. I want to have everything ready already. So here's what our very simple model looks like. I'm not showing you the intrusions because we're just going to take those outlines and project them down to depth anyways. If you want to have a look at those, well, we can have a look at them later. So now we have these surfaces. So what are we going to do to actually build a voxel? Because what I want to do is run a forward model of this very simple world. And in order to do that, we need to take these nice surfaces, and you see this cage that I've shown here, this white box. That's going to be the lithology vox set, and that needs to be populated with the different lithologies we're talking about in our model. And then it also needs to be populated with a magnetic susceptibility value for each lithology. And then that's what's going to go to VPMG for the forward modeling. So there's a couple ways you can do this, but we're here today to talk a little bit about the way that we use scripting in our line of work. And so there is a built-in model manager in GOCAD Mining Suite, and in this situation, it worked just fine. There's nothing stopping us from using it. But because I want to go that couple steps further, I want to populate it with the magnetic susceptibility, and then I want to run a forward model, I'm going to use this macro that I put together. So that's what I'm going to show you here now. So if you're not familiar with the macros in GOCAD or the scripting, the nice thing down here is there's this little record button. And when you hit this record button, what it does is it keeps track of all the different actions and commands that you're doing in the 3D viewer. And then when you're done, you can hit stop. Let's just turn it on here for a second. We're just going to spin this around, hide a surface, do whatever. Now we're going to hit stop. And what happens is it pops up this macro editor. It shows you a list of your recording, your last recording that you've done. So all I did was hide something. That's the only command that was done. You can also go into lists of favorites or all these other different things that you can do. And basically, you can just drag and drop commands that you've already done into this, and then you can start adding all sorts of different inputs here. Now, this is a very simple command, and this is like an internal command that you're not really supposed to be having in macros. There's no reason to. But I wanted to open this just to show you that we can tag these different inputs to the command as a macro variable. They're going to show up over here. And then what this is going to do is make a quick and dirty UI automatically where the user selects this. And you may want to feed that variable in through all sorts of other different things. So I'd say this is really analogous to that model builder that they have in QGIS. It's the same sort of idea, is where you take commands that you can do manually and you're linking them all together in this sort of interactive. You're not quite drawing lines in between functions here because it's a little more complicated than that. But you get some options just from this menu. You know, you could do if statements, all sorts of kind of control flow, for loops, while loops, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really great. But the nice thing about all this is it's being translated to JavaScript under the hood. Interestingly, GOCAD was kind of weirdly ahead of its time in terms of client-side JavaScript. And the point is everything gets translated into JavaScript, and you can go back to here and put your own JavaScript in and just start writing. So essentially what we've got in this macro editor is, yeah, there's the simple version of you say have to export a DXF 100 times. You record yourself doing it once, and then you put a for loop in there and you just do it for all the surfaces, go get a coffee and you come back. But the nice thing about this is that this is basically an API between JavaScript and everything that's in your GOCAD project, which is awesome because it gives you the ability to basically, you know, as I was saying last time, if you can imagine it now, you can do it because you can eventually bang away something together here in JavaScript, at least, to do what it is that you want. So in my case, what I wanted was a model builder that kind of worked a certain way to help with these projects where, let's say I only have a surface for a unit. I don't want to make a closed shell, you know, and I don't necessarily want to use the model manager because of both the complexity of my models and things like I don't want to do more than draw an outline of a surface of an intrusion and project it to depth. That's all I want to do. I don't want to make a surface for that because I know I'm going to have to change it anyways. So what I want to do is basically have a model builder that accepts surfaces and then accepts curves and then thinks about distance to things and builds all those things in, takes care of the lithology attribution and takes care of the magnetic susceptibility attribution. And even with this one, runs forward model for me once I build the model, which is awesome. So the point is I did that with the macro editor. We're not going to get into the nuts and bolts of how that works today because it's really complicated, but that's just something that I wanted to have. And, you know, there's basically, it came out of looking for a tool that I couldn't really find, and here it is. And so the whole thing is run off of tables. So I'll go down to my resources column here, and let's just go up. So this is the starting model for this webinar. So basically, it's a table that looks like this. It's got the name of my surfaces here in order. It's got this event column. And so what this does is basically just order the number of, you know, geological events here. There's a few different types of, let's call them events. Look, some of this stuff is not going to seem that unfamiliar to certain people, right? We got deposits, erosions, and intrusions here, but there's all sorts of other stuff that I've built into this because I like that way of thinking about it, but I also want to extend it with some more GOCAD-y stuff. So basically what you're doing here is you're specifying whether a surface will fill the box set above it or below it, or whether it will erase other surfaces, et cetera, whether it's a closed shell in the case of an intrusion. But we've also got some other stuff here. Like you notice I've got closed polygon as a type. So what that's going to do is just basically attribute a lithology within that closed polygon as being the granite. And overprinting everything else because it's later in the order. And then I've got the value of the different lithologies here that's going to get populated within that region. So that's the marching orders, let's call it, for the macro. So let's run the thing and see what that looks like here. I'm going to go to my, here's my Vox set here. Which one am I looking at? Yeah. So it's already got some properties painted on it from when I was practicing. So let's just blank those out. So those look like nothing. There's lithology on there. We'll put a section on, okay? Nothing. And then we'll go down here. I'll just run my macro. So we're going to go build model, assign sus, forward model. Okay, so this is what this looks like. And that's what I mean. It's a quick and dirty UI. You can really clean these up and you can certainly comment them better than I've done, but people will be busy. So this is how it goes. So I'm going to fill in everything I need here. I pick my Vox set, pick the lithology property on it, pick out my table, my control table, let's call it. There it is, scenario 1. A background value, which you need because there has to be a first deposit surface in the model or a first surface, and you need to define what's all around that. So in this case, we're going to pick intermediate volcanics as our background value. There's an optional topography feature here if you want to erode the whole thing by, and I do, so I picked that out. This magnetic table, so this is basically just specifying what susceptibility to assign to each unit. That's here. Now I know there's a way of doing this with VPMG read on this, but you know, at the end of the day, I'm a geologist. All this stuff is set up with the help of a geophysicist. So, you know, I'm not representing myself as a physicist here. This is just so I can get my pictures from my forward model and move forward. So anyways, we pick out our magnetic property there, and we're going to give this thing a file name. I'll go to my webinar directory, and we're just going to call this for the web. I type it on camera sometime. I don't know how Twitch people do it. And then we'll go in the webinar again. We're going to give the forward model. Put a name, and we'll just hit apply. So this is iterating through that table. And it's following the directions I built into the macro to fill out those regions with the different lithology properties based on what kind of controlling surface it is. And in this case, it's relatively simple. We have some surfaces and then we have closed polygons. We don't have to worry about that error right now. But there you go. So this is a plan view section from kind of depth, but the point is you're seeing it's following my surfaces there, and that's what we want it to be. We'll have a look at the mag-sus. Same idea, mag-sus has been populated. Now these values is where the geophysicist side of the things come into play. These values have already been determined by someone who's much better at this than I am. And you know, we've discussed it and worked out what we think reasonable values are. And so that's what I'm using. These aren't just random numbers. And if you do this with random numbers, it's not going to work properly for obvious reasons. So, you know, we don't really feel it out. We have some pretty good methods for figuring out about what those mag-sus values should be when we don't have a lot of orientation data from mag-sus, which unfortunately is a lot of the time. So it built the model and I think it ran it. So let's import the forward model results and see what those look like. We'll go into VPMG here, and I'm only going to do this once just to prove that you know, I am actually doing this live. I do have swap codes available too, though. Okay, great. So there's my points that I got. And as you zoom out, you see here that it's calculated. This is the calculated response for the forward model. And let's compare it to what the observed was too here. So I'm just going to duplicate my view quickly. And we'll put this one over here. That is the observed. This one over here, we'll put that as the calculated. So let's have a look at this and see what we think. Again, we started with a deliberately wrong model to try to give us a way forward here in the subsurface and see how close our ideas match reality, perhaps. So I noticed a couple things. For one, the northwest mafic body up here is looking pretty good. It's getting the thickness that we see in the observed data down okay. We get a little bit of a glow to the north here that we're not getting in our model. We're not matching the intensity, but that's not really a problem at this stage either. We have a bit of a dropout here that isn't present in the calculated model, but all in all, it's okay. And the dips don't seem wildly off, which is a really good sign. We'll ignore the middle for now. The intrusions are looking nice, predictably. They're never very hard to fit at this stage. We don't capture the zonation, obviously, down here. But since I don't really know what that zonation is, I don't want to capture it. Maybe not until we do a constrained inversion even, because My philosophy with this is if you know what is causing something, or you think you know very strongly what is causing something in the mag data, you should model it. If you don't know, you should leave it unknown because you don't know. In this case, I know that it's due to some kind of zonation, but that's all I know. I don't know if that's because there's maybe two intrusions in a sort of concentric pattern, or there's alteration around the edges, or what. So we're just going to leave it alone. It's looking pretty concentric. And then the Sandy Beach Lake down here is okay in the main area, but down in the southeast, down in the east, see, I added this kind of dinosaur head shape. Looks like a Parasaurolophus for my vertebrate paleontology heads. And the reason that's there, it's to reconcile some of the mapping in the area, which shows the intrusion kind of extending in this salient. And it's definitely in contrast to the mag, but that is what's there in the mapping. But clearly with the forward modeling and looking at it now more critically, like this intrusion, if it's there, is at depth. It's not, this head thing is not there. It's not right. So we're going to want to remove that. I'll show you what I mean a little bit. We're just going to zoom into the map here for a second. Here's the 250K map. Okay. So you see they've got that salient put in there. And this is useful. I understand why this is on there from a mapping perspective, because it's sort of saying, look, this is this point where we're starting to see more granite and outcrop. Maybe it's not as continuous as we're showing here, but the idea is that maybe we're starting to see this thing become almost more concordant, like a series of dikes or something like that. So what's interesting though is if we actually look at the 50K map for the area, may even be finer than 50K, is this area is no outcrop. And this is, I think, the source for that bigger scale one. So what we're seeing here though is like that there is a couple outcrops of granite, but if you go to look in the legend at this 10A, 10B, that's apolitic and pegmatitic granite. So it sounds to me like we're getting near the top of the intrusion, or at least its margins. We may be looking at a place where that intrusion is kind of just starting to stope out into the wall rock a little bit along the regional layering, like I was just describing. Or alternatively, the reason in the mag why we see a little bit of layering here, even though they're talking about intrusion, is that we might just have volcanic on top of intrusion in like a little bit of a shelf configuration, again, near the top of that pluton. But so if you go out there at the surface, you see mixed pegmatitic and apolitic intrusion and country rock, which is on the map represented as granite because that's mostly what's there at depth. But for us, geophysically, what we're seeing is a lot of the near surface. This is that area here, and you can see layering continuing up into this banded iron formation, into this anomaly here. And there's some folding and everything, but this isn't intrusion in here. So we're going to need to adjust that. So let's get that outline in and fix it. That's under my intrusive bodies here, Sandy Beach Lake outline. So just have a look. I've got this thing projected down to, I've got a thing this projected to the topography, but there's no real reason to because I'm just using outline anyway. So we're just going to move that. Yeah, it's better. Put the nodes on here. So there's the dinosaur head. So we're just going to very quickly go through and, things in here. We're just going to call that, oh, that's not good. You can see again, here's that anomaly. Here's a mag anomaly for and we'll get rid of some of these hanging parts that I don't like the look of. And then we're just going to bridge. Great. Now, since I edited my existing shape and it's still going to match what's in my table, again, that's just it's based on the name of the controlling object. I'm good to go here. We'll just leave that. We can move on to the next thing. So what else? Let me see. Sorry, my notes got messed around. Well, another thing I'm noticing is this fold nose. I'm going to reset this. Sorry, I'm just trying to turn my forward modeling data back on here. Yeah, there we go, calculated. Okay. Yeah, if we zoom out a little bit, you know, we're doing an okay job capturing this sort of glow to the south of this fold nose here. So it sort of looks like things are plunging down that way. That's what we've got in the model. That's pretty good. But one thing I'm noticing is we're not getting this low at all further out along the line here. And so, you know, you see I have a nice low in the background here. So this looks like it's dipping really steeply. So I think what we're going to need to do is cut this surface up and change its dip here. We need to change it along strike too, but we're going to leave that for now. But I want to fix this area in here. So we'll hide my points. And this is pretty simple. Again, at this stage, we're just focusing on really coarse things. So we're just going to go ahead and edit that surface. I don't need my other window right now anyways. We're just going to cut right through there. Let's call it there. Great. So we're splitting this thing into two parts. Okay. And then we're going to make a new part from the part that we want to steepen up. And we can just call it, I made two. Name. Go okay. Okay. We have our temporary surface there. Perfect. So how steep do we want this thing? Here's the 2D mag data, which is going to serve as well. You know, I want that thing to be almost vertical. So all we're going to do is go rotate here, pick that origin out in the middle of the surface, rotating along an axis along strike. Start this with some small numbers here. Make sure this is working. Yeah, let's steepen that up. Okay, really vertical, good enough. I'm just going to quickly translate it up a bit too, because I want to make sure it's still pure. Which, without getting into the nuts and bolts of it, needs to happen. Yeah, we're good there. Okay, and so what we're left with now is this scenario here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this part. And we're going to make a new surface joining up these two just on their borders. And we can give it the name of the existing one because this is the one we're going to save. Okay. And we're just going to add this surface to the surface we just edited. That, merge those parts all together because, again, and because we have the same name, we don't need to change anything with the macro. We run it when it's time. This is the second macro I'm going to end up running here. It's got a couple extra surfaces on it, which I'll get to in a minute. But the point is that's the same name. So we've edited that. We've edited the intrusion a little bit. And the one thing left here is, you know, perfect. Scene 7. I tried to get everything organized. Looking at the mag again, we have this sort of high in the middle. And I'm thinking about what kind of fold this is. We're not going to get into that today. You know, what's going on here is complicated and doesn't really make all that much sense the more you think about it. But what I'm thinking we may be dealing with here is if we can pull that mafic. First of all, I'm thinking that mafic volcanic unit is at depth here. Okay, because we've got the younger unit in the middle. So, you know, if this is a syncline at the scale of the area of interest, even though regionally it's an anticline, which I'm already getting a little bit of cognitive dissonance over, that mafic volcanic should be down in depth. And what I'm thinking this high in the middle of it might be is a little bit of a dome in that surface coming up near the surface, maybe piercing the surface. And so we're seeing either more magnetic volcanics or even a little bit of the gabbro sills that are present in this mafic that are producing that high mag signature. So to model that in, we're going to add that surface, because remember, we just had the limbs before. Now we're going to add something in the center of the area. So we're going to start with a surface that looks like this. Or are we? Actually, now I think about it, the main trend is going like this. So I'm going to start with the surface that's kind of rotated instead. Make it nice and big. So we're going to make sure we go past the edges of our model, do something like that. And we'll just call that magnetic top. That's what that thing looks like. This is a default surface. We're going to start by splitting that up a little bit. We're going to want this to have a pretty fine mesh on it because we're going to use the surface editor. And so a lot of times I try to work with a coarse mesh for long. If I can. In this case, it's okay because I want to project the RTP data. So let's just split it a few times, get this thing nice and busy. That's probably good there, more than good. I'm going to beautify the triangles here. Why not? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but we want triangles to look a certain way sometimes, don't we? So there we go. So what we're going to do now is, like I said, we're going to transfer that RTP data onto this mesh, and I'll show you why in a second. So all we need to do, enough zoom. Vertical projection here. We're going to pick our client surface as the one I just made. We're going to pick the server as the magnetic data grid, transfer RTP onto there. Well, bam. Okay. So now let's have a look at what that surface looks like. It's got RTP on it. Nice. So I'm just going to use the surface editor. Really, really simple here. Okay, because we've already got the limbs in. We're going to let the limbs cut off whatever we do to the sides here. So we don't need to worry too much about the configuration outside of the actual fold structure. We just really want to make a bulge in this thing that's right underneath that high. Okay, so one real easy way you can do that is with this little surface editor tool. So we'll go into surface editor. We're going to keep it real simple. You can get real creative. You can actually let's get creative. Why not? So what I'm doing here is basically defining the area of my surface I want to GOCAD let me edit. Okay. Something like that. So the idea is I'm going to be able to move these nodes, going to edit the surface like using V splines. In other words, we're going to push and pull the surface to get where we want it to. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because I'm not really worried about fitting anything at this point. We have the RTP data, but even then, that's sort of qualitatively linked to what I'm about to do. So I'm not going to get too hung up on fitting. I'm not going to get too hung up on surfacing. I'm just making a big flat surface, horizontal dip, whatever. Don't at me. In the center of this thing, things can get a little bit interesting. And we're going to start with a simple case here. Okay. So now all we need to do to reshape this surface, and now you'll see why I put the RTP onto it, is because I know that's where I want my high to be, right? Saying that area is closer to the surface. You know what? So I'm gonna add one more modeler, a little bit more control over it. Here we go. Look. That's okay. So basically, we just click on these points, pull them up. That's good. Click on this point, I'm pulling it down. Remember, I'm talking about fold interference here. We're coming up with a big tight dome. So let's tighten it up a little bit. Okay. Good. And again, the reason I just want to work with the surface is because I don't want to be doing too much modeling. I've never done any modeling at this scale. Not too much modeling yet. Because really what you want to do at this stage is minimize the nitpicking. If you got a bunch of drill hole data and you're trying to model a real deal deposit that has subsurface data, yeah, you better be fitting the data from the get-go. But in this case, since we have virtually nothing except the mapping ideas, we're going to try something crazy here, and we're just going to put this stretched out shape and see maybe if that's centered over that RTP high. Is this going to help us? Is this going to hurt us? Is this going to make the forward model look a little more realistic? Okay, we'll leave it at that. Doesn't need to be perfect, like I said, just to test, just to get the idea. So we'll hide the editor now. We've got this pretty crazy looking shape, but again, fold interference patterns, these things happen. So we see the idea is to have that tight southwest northeast orientation and the more broad open, and making this sort of pilot and, or what's the word I'm looking for? Anyways, it almost looks like, well, it's a dome basin. Let's not get more complicated than that. So where are we going to put this thing at depth? That's the question, right? Because I just made a surface at the topography, and that's not right. So what we're going to do is just move this down until it's at about the right place to be explaining this anomaly. So, because again, we don't know where this is. We don't even know if the surface exists yet. So we're just trying something here. So we'll go to move. Okay, we'll pick that one. And we're just going to lower that down a bit at a time. See what that looks like. So I'm hitting R, that's restrict mode up here. If you've ever wondered why our screenshots have restrict mode on sometimes, it's because it basically restricts, just shows the section of the surface on whatever grid you're looking at. It's very useful for this kind of, it's really what we care about at this point. You know? So let's say it's this sort of core high here that has a trend like that. We're already missing this, but again, this is just a place to start. Okay? So that would look something like that. We're saying that thing's coming out of the page. It's getting blanked out by the intrusion here. You know, I was originally going to add a little layer of mafic volcanic or intermediate volcanics over top of it, but let's keep it really simple for now and see what happens. Okay, so we got that surface in, it's extending to the edge of the model. We're ready to go in and modify the table that I had set up. I'm going to remove that. What do we call this thing? Deep mag. So I'm adding this surface in, I'm calling it a deposit, and I'm going to say that it's going to be adding, let me check my lithology codes, because as you know, we've got integer values for the lithology codes that get translated into word values. So intermediate volcanics above, no, we don't want that. We want mafic volcanics above. So we're going to go mafic volcanics above, or sorry, we're going to go, oh, we do need a bottom. What happens when you try to go off script, folks? We'll copy this, make bottom, because we're modeling a layer here. We're going to give that a nominal thickness vertically based off what we see in the mag data, which is about 400 meters. Okay, so that's what that looks like. Again, we'll check it on restrict. Okay, so we're just getting a little bit of mag. Is that 400 or 40? 400. Oh, this one. Well, let's see what it does for us. So we'll go check my table here, make sure we got both those things in. So a bottom. So we're going to put mafic volcanics above that and whatever the background is below. And then we're going to put top as the next thing, which is going to put intermediate volcanics above it, which is great. And then the rest of the model is the same. Great. So now we'll blank out a Vox set again to run that on, and we'll see what it looks like. So basically setting this up all the same as before. Out my mag table, picking out my mag property, and we're going to give this a new name. Great. The data file again has been prepared by a real deal geophysicist to help this process. Apply. Ran. Great. Built our model as well. So looking in section here, we probably got a little too conservative with the thickness. Maybe it should have been, but in any case, something to try. So there you go, right? We put that extra layer in there. We had it come up near the surface, piercing the surface around that Gardner Lake stock. But we made it a little too thin. 400 meters is probably closer to 800 meters. Oh, I'm of suspicion that this side in the south isn't representative of what we did. Let's see what the forward model looks like. So we'll go to VPMG here and import our results. Right. We'll split our view again, just so we can compare a little bit easier. Right, so there we go. Look at that. Maybe it's looking okay. It's interesting, it's not there, but that's not the point. The point at this point is, can we maybe explain what we're seeing in the middle of the structure by folding? Can we explain the limbs the way we think we can? I think we can. Oh, I forgot to change I forgot to steepen this limb out. I forgot to remove the dinosaur head. Suffice it to say, had I have done that, I can show you what that looks like. They would have been fixed too. But you got to change the table, and I just didn't do it. So sorry about that, folks. Believe it or not, I blame too much practice. That's a different one too. In any case, what I like about what we did is that you do see that high coming through about where we did, but what we still aren't getting is the lows out in the basin. You know, it's a little bit that's all put as intermediate volcanics, which we think is a little bit magnetic. So that's probably not right. I think the next thing that I'd want to try here, you know, and I'm running out of time anyways, is we put another layer on top of that dome. And then what we know is there, which is a non-magnetic volcanic above that, and we'll see how this picture starts to emerge. But the point is, that's kind of how I'm working here at this stage of the process in GOCAD. And to summarize, I wanted to show you a few things this afternoon. One, this is a general flow from a consulting standpoint. Wanted to do a bit of a ride along. What we do when we have relatively sparse constraining data, how we leverage what we have in GOCAD, what we know, kind of normally do to work with the geophysics and get a sort of interesting story to start with. And two, that the idea at this point is really to focus on the big picture, these big coarse things, minimize the amount of modeling you're doing, because frankly, you know, one way you could approach this problem is by walking a section through this image to begin with and putting a bunch of hypothetical fold shapes on it. And the issue with doing that is you're drawing something that doesn't exist. So if you have the unconstrained inversion, that's one thing, although you really shouldn't use unconstrained inversions like that. It's also, you know, it's just a little bit of a time risk situation. It's better in this case, I find, start with a big surface, adjust it as manually or as simply as you can, and see if you can reproduce the broad brushstrokes of what you need in the model. Three, the third thing I wanted to show you, the title of the talk, but things ended up changing as I actually put it together, is how we can extend the different tools we have available to us in GOCAD to make our lives easier. Automating things like building a box set model and running a forward model, and doing all sorts of new things that you or I think of along the way. We do it all the time. It's kind of a running joke, the back and forth macro thing with the consulting team here, but it's really useful and they're easy to understand. It's JavaScript and you can comment them up. They look nice and it works really good. And you end up building something that helps members of the team. And maybe eventually, hey, makes it to the big leagues, gets put in GOCAD. So if you have any questions, I realize I kind of ran over a little bit here time-wise, feel free to ask them. In the meantime, I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint here because if you like this, you'll love TMA Q3 2022. So if I understand correctly, that means, between May to June, September, or sorry, June to September, somewhere in that neighborhood. He's talking about building a geological framework from exploratory modeling of magnetic data in GOCAD Mining Suite. So sounds kind of familiar, but I know he's going to come at it from a different perspective, maybe a more skilled perspective. But it's going to be a really interesting talk. So make sure to tune in for that one. Carla, I'm doing your job for you, and I'm sorry.
Oh, good. Thank you, Shaun.
Right.
That was interesting. There's a few tools there that I've never seen before, so gotta go try them out.
Yeah.
And thank you to everyone who joined today. And for anyone who's here, feel free to type any questions you may have or raise your hand. And while you do that, indeed, like Shaun said, join us next quarter, which would be July, August, September, if I'm not mistaken. So sometime in those 3 months, we'll send an email when we have the date for Tomat Campagne's lecture.
I think we're getting the link. If there's LinkedIn comments, I think Isabel's going to send them across too.
Yes.
I'm questions if there's LinkedIn questions. It's sunny in Nova Scotia Thursday afternoon. You can email me questions too, gang. Don't worry. All that stuff we want to do.
All right. We'll just wait a couple more seconds. Whoops. It says none so far on the LinkedIn side and nothing here. So
exactly clear. Well, I'm glad to hear it. But if you're listening out there, leave them in the YouTube comments. Maybe we talked about that with Jennifer's talk.
We do answer the YouTube comments. So yeah. For sure. Yeah.
And yeah, we'll see you next time, I think. If that's good. Okay. Well, like I said, feel free to message me, slide into those DMs on LinkedIn or send me an email, ShaunOC@mirrorgeoscience.com, provided something good. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about any of this kind of stuff. And we'll see you again next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah. Bye-bye.